In this video, we'll look at how to take static questions and make them dynamic using algorithmic variables. Algorithmic questions allow you to create new versions of a question by recalculating variables. You can use variables in the body of the question, in equations, and in graphs, which gives you a lot of ways to create dynamic content. When an algorithmic question is in a test, instructors can print multiple versions with different values. You can select multiple versions from the Print to PDF menu. Then, by selecting Recalculate Algorithmic Variables and clicking Print New Version multiple times, instructors can generate multiple versions of a test with different values for the variables. When creating assignments from algorithmic content, you can recalculate the variables so each student receives a unique version of the test to prevent cheating. Now, let's build an algorithmic question. To start, I have a question set with two copies of a question that deals with calculating the area of a rectangle. Right now, they're both static, but I'm going to make the second one algorithmic. First, I want to be able to clearly see which question has variables and which doesn't. Let's click the Question Information button. Then we'll select Variable Status and click OK. We can see that the Has Variable indicator for both questions is false because we haven't added any variables yet. Let's edit the second question and create some variables. For this question, we want to change it so the length and the width are random numbers and the answers change to match those numbers. Let's start by creating a variable for the length. Click the Tools menu. Then click Variable Definitions. The Variables dialog box shows all the variables in the question and their current values. Let's click Add Variable to create a variable for the length. First, let's give the variable a name. It's helpful to give the variables clear names so it's easier for you or someone else to troubleshoot the question if there are issues. Variable names cannot have spaces. I'm going to name this variable length. Next, you can select a type. You can choose variable, function, or condition. For our length variable, I'm going to select variable. We'll look at how to use conditions later. You can also enter a description. This is optional, but if you have a complicated variable that references other variables, it's a good idea to include a description. The expression field is where you build the actual variable using a variety of built-in functions. If you have questions about the available functions, you can click Help. Then click the built-in function link to see a list of available functions and constants. For each function, it shows the syntax, type, a description of the function, as well as samples of syntax and results. For example, the absolute value function with the value of -10 will return 10. You can search through the help to find functions you need to build your variables. For the length variable, let's start with a random number between 1 and 5. I know that there's a function called rand that I can use. As I start typing, notice that the system will start auto-matching what I type with available functions. Notice that there is some help at the bottom of the expression field. In the syntax, we can see that we need to enter an integer that indicates the maximum value we want. The function is going to pull a random number between 1 and the max value that we enter. So rand 3 might return 1, 2, or 3. Each function has a name and one or more parameters in parentheses. The max value I want for my length to be is 5. So I'll enter rand parentheses 5. Because creating algorithmic questions is like programming, it's a good idea to check your work as you go. You should click Test several times and check the calculated value field to verify that the calculated values are what you're expecting. The numbers look good to me, so I'll click OK. Since I didn't enter a description, the description shows the function I'm using and the parameters that I put in. The current value of the variable is also displayed. Let's create another variable for the width. Click Add Variable. I'll name the new variable width. I'll use the ran function again with 5 as the maximum value. I'll click Test several times to make sure the variable works as I expect. Then I'll click OK. Now that I have variables for the length and the width, let's insert them into the question. I'll click OK in the Variables dialog box to return to the question. There are two ways to insert variables into a question. The first is through the Insert menu. I'll select the length value in the question and then click Insert. Then I'll click Insert Variable. We'll see a hint about a faster way to insert variables. I'll click OK because we'll look at that faster way in a second. Then I'll select the length variable and click Insert. Now we see the variable name instead of the static value that was there before. If we click the Preview tab, we can see the actual value of the variable instead of the variable name. The current value of the length variable is 3. We can recalculate the variable in the question by clicking the Tools menu, and then by clicking Recalculate Variables. The value of the length variable is now 4. Now let's click the Design tab and insert the width variable. Instead of using the Insert menu, you can insert a variable by typing the variable name surrounded by 2 pound signs or hashtags on either side. For example, pound pound width pound pound. I'll select the static number for the width and replace it with the width variable. To be sure that we entered the variable name correctly, let's select Recalculate Variables from the Tools menu. Now we see the width variable name in the question, so we know that we entered it correctly. Let's go to the Preview tab and see the values in the question. After you insert the variables into the question, you should recalculate the variables repeatedly to make sure they act as you expect them to. Now we have a problem with the values of our variables. The length is the longest side of a rectangle, but in this iteration of the question, the width is longer than the length. So we need a way to make sure that the length is always the longest side. We can do that by using a condition. Let's go back to the Design tab and open the variable definitions. In the Variables dialog, click Add Variable. I'm going to call this variable longest. From the Type drop-down, I'll select Condition. A condition doesn't set a value. It checks whether a condition is true or false. If the condition is false, the system will continue to recalculate the variables until it is true. In this case, we want to check if the value of the length variable is greater than the width variable. If it's not, we want the values to recalculate until it is. For the expression, I'll type length greater than width. This will ensure that the length is always longer than the width and that they're never equal. As always, we'll click Test a few times to make sure nothing is wrong. The calculated value shows true, so we know that the calculated value of the length is greater than the value of the width. Keep in mind that the system will continue to recalculate the values until the condition is true. It will recalculate the values 200 times. If, after 200 attempts, the system cannot calculate values that meet the conditions in the question, you'll receive an alert and you'll need to troubleshoot your variables. Let's click OK to add the condition. Now that we have the condition in our variable list, let's click OK and test the values again. We'll click the Preview tab and recalculate the values a few times. Notice that the length is always the highest value. We've made the measurements in the question dynamic. Now we need to create variables for the answers so that they match the measurements. Let's select variable definitions from the Tools menu. Then we'll add a new variable. I'll call this variable correct so it's clear that it is the correct answer. Since the area of a rectangle is length times the width, I'll enter length asterisk width. If you're ever unsure of the mathematical operators, you can check the built-in functions in the help. Then we'll test it. There are no errors, so let's insert it into the question and check it again. We'll click OK to save the variable, and then OK to close the variables dialog box. The first answer is the correct answer, so I'll select that number and replace it with pound pound correct pound pound. Then I'll recalculate the variable so I can be sure that I typed the variable name correctly. Now let's click the Preview tab and recalculate the variables to be sure that the answer matches the length and the width values. Let's click OK and save this question before creating the incorrect answers. When you're working on a question that uses a lot of variables, it's a good idea to click OK and save the question periodically. Now that we've added some variables to the question, notice that the has variable indicator is now true. Let's edit the question and create variables for the other answers so that they're in sync with the length and width variables. Now let's create some incorrect answers. The first incorrect answer is going to be the width plus the length. We'll begin by creating another variable. I could give the variable a specific name, but I'll keep things simple. I'm going to call it incorrect1. For the expression, I'll type length plus width and test it. The calculated value is fine, so I'll click OK to save it. I'm going to create two other incorrect answers while I'm here, and then just insert the variables for the incorrect answers all at once. I want one incorrect answer that is the perimeter, and another that is just 2 times the length. I'll name the variable incorrect2. I'll enter my expression as 2 asterisk length plus 2 asterisk width. Again, if you have questions about the different operators, click the help. We'll test it again and click OK. Finally, I'll create one more variable for the third incorrect answer. I'll call the variable incorrect3 and make the expression 2 asterisk length. We'll test it and then click OK. Now that I have all the variables I need, we'll click OK. Next, I'll insert the variables for the incorrect answers into the question. I'll insert the variables by typing the variable names with 2 pound signs on both sides of the name. Now I'll recalculate the variables to verify that I typed the variable names correctly. Let's click the Preview tab and recalculate the variables. I'm going to recalculate several more times to make sure that the numbers are okay. Notice that one of my incorrect answers is calculated to the same value as the correct answer. This is another good example of why you want to test your algorithmic questions thoroughly. I can prevent this issue by creating another condition that ensures that all of the values of the answer variables are unique. Let's open the Design tab and define another condition. I'm going to name this variable unique. From the Type dropdown, I'm going to select Condition. There is a function called isUnique that you can use to be sure that specific variables don't have the same values. In the expression, I'll type isUnique. In the parentheses, I'll type the names of the 4 answer variables I created. Then I'll test it to make sure that I didn't mistype anything. The calculated value shows true, and I didn't have any errors. I'll click OK and go back to the Preview tab and check the values. I don't see any duplicate values this time when I recalculate. Let's click OK and save the question. We've seen how important it is to check our work as we go. Creating algorithmic questions is just like programming, so it's important to QA each question. You can also recalculate variables in the editor pane by selecting the question menu, and then selecting Recalculate Algorithms. This will recalculate the variables for the question you currently have selected in the editor pane. Or you can select the Test or Set menu, and then select Recalculate All Algorithms to recalculate all the algorithmic questions. And that's just one example of how to create algorithmic questions.